Shabbat Shalom. Our Parsha, our Torah portion this Shabbat is Emor, which means say. Throughout the Torah, we hear Vayedaber Adonai el Moshe le'mor daber da 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 da. And the Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak and say. It is the primary formula setting up the commands given by Moses from God. Our Parsha this Shabbat, it's no different except at the very beginning and a few spots along the way where it deviates. And instead of Vayedaber, it says Vayomer Adonai el Moshe Emor. And the Lord said to Moses, say to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say to them. There is a significant reason for this. How we deliver a particular message matters. There is a significant change in the way somebody hears it, somebody responds. The listener takes away something different when something is spoken as a command, rather than responding in a way to something which is communicated in a more interpersonal way. Lorraine Enlow, who's a doctoral candidate at the Jewish Theological Seminary, said about this, in Hebrew, the established formula has been Vayedaber. But this verse uses Emor 3 times. So why is it different here? Perhaps the breaking of the formula of our Parsha's irregular Emor is about more than just words. Using wordplay, the Midrash connects the Parsha's Emor here to Omer in Psalm 19, which is spelled the same way, but is used as a poetic noun. Day to day utters speech, Omer, and night to night reveals knowledge. It explains that the day and the night are actually negotiating the giving and the borrowing of time from each other to create the cycles of the year between the equinoxes. There is no speech, or as the Midrash puts it, they pay each other back harmoniously without a contract. Daber is generally translated, as we said, as speak, and Emor as say or tell. While Daber is used for speaking aloud, Emor might also take on the meaning of communication. And as any parent or teacher, we have some of you out here, knows all too well, communication does not always require speaking, and speaking does not always result in communication. Has anybody ever experienced that? The day and the night are communicating or telling Emor without using speech, Omer. Our Parsha's opening verse then might be translated as, and God said to Moses, communicate, tell. Because the material to come requires more than just mere words and passive listening. In our world, there are protests and counter-protests. Speaking, often at high volume, is a huge part of it. Sometimes, not much actual communication is happening in these exchanges. Every act of speech requires a kind of translation on the part of the recipient who's hearing, and communication is not actually specifically guaranteed. And after all, if even day and night can communicate wordlessly, is language sufficient? We need to ask ourselves, what are we truly saying when we speak? How might we move from just saying words or commanding to truly communicating? So our takeaway here in this Parsha is that there is a significant and intentional difference between that which is said, that which is commanded, that which is told. It's being set up in the form of how things are phrased, how things are heard, and how things are acted upon. Ultimately, what is God's intent, and how is that meant to be portrayed? This Parsha covers extremely important details, ranging from how the priests were supposed to behave, how they were supposed to conduct themselves, to Shabbat and our festivals and our holiday observance, to even blasphemy, once again using words in a negative way. It sets up the difference between when one is speaking versus when one is saying something. Speaking versus saying. The difference is vital to how the message is received. That message depends on it. By establishing the difference between the two, it implies that to say something is actually to communicate. When we give a speech or when we speak, we are talking to someone. Yet when we are saying something, we are relaying something that could create a dialogue and possibly a future conversation. As we said earlier, the Parsha covers rules, particularly about all of our holidays and festivals and Shabbat. Remember, we are actually in our journey at the beginning of the new year. Passover, Pesach, our freedom, our redemption from slavery, and we're working our way towards Shavuot and the giving of the commandments at Mount Sinai. God has communicated through Moses to us his or her desires and commands, yet wants it communicated. Somehow we are meant to process things and live our lives accordingly. Sadly, the Israelites of that generation didn't do so well. They didn't get into the promised land. It was the next generation that was able to do it. Communicate, hear, listen, go forward. So what of us today? How does this relate? Our world is in a state of chaos and hopefully change for the good. We can only hope and pray and have faith that there is a method to the madness, that there is some plan that we are not aware of that will elevate us all once we get through this stage, this darkness. For example, after the Me Too movement and what happened with George Floyd, a lot of things changed. The anger, dissent, and protests made a difference and were a catalyst for many changes. Even in the entertainment industry, and we go to the movies all the time here, there are roles that at one point in time were perceived to be for a white person, and now are being cast with a person of color, a variety of colors. Has anyone noticed this? The viewer is meant to look past that and just see the character itself. What is the character trying to communicate and portray? It is sad to say that the viewer has to look past the color to see the character because we've been so conditioned otherwise. In the times of Pharaoh, things could be looked at only one particular way, the only way the Israelites knew. They were slaves. They had always been there. This has been so in their time. They were told what to do, and they did it. They were commanded, they did it. There was no interchange, there was no dialogue, there was no communication or conversation. There was only someone with a whip keeping them in line, presiding over everything in their particular universe of being. The concept of freedom and free will and the ability to actually manifest destiny was something only Moses could actually see and help implement. At times, it was necessary for him to give commands in an oratory form of speech, whereas at other times, he needed to communicate more interpersonally and say things by saying things in specific ways that could be more easily processed, heard, understood. Everyone had to go forward with faith, trusting this new leader. Trusting that as night became day over and over again, that there was some new form or structure to it all, some unseen plan at play, devised by an unseen God. Trusting that what was being told and communicated would have a positive impact and be actually worth all of the struggle and the chaos of the wandering. To leave what is known, even if it's really bad, takes courage. The tides and seasons of their lives were structured by the hierarchy induced by Pharaoh. And now, the laws and the commands given by God through Moses helped elevate them and were communicated in a variety of ways, as we've said, so that they could process, hear, and act upon it. Everyone could either passively sit back and listen to Moses' words as a speech, kind of like what you might be doing in a sermon, or be a little more proactive and actually engage in the dialogue and the conversation, which is why sometimes I ask you, did you ever experience that? Viewing it more as a communication handed down through a particular emissary of the divine. We are all emissaries of the divine. Words matter. Speech matters. What we say matters. And how we communicate with one another matters. Today, everyone has a lot to say about politics and injustice, polarizing people into many different literal camps. We need to be very, very careful what we say, who we say it to, who we're around, mindful of our environment, mindful. We need to watch our words. We need to watch our speech. We need to watch our intent. We need to communicate with sensitivity, integrity, and morality in ways reflecting the divine. We have the divine within us. We are created B'Tselem Elohim. By doing this, we will reflect the divine that is really deep inside there and always surrounding us, always guiding us, even when we think we are feeling it not. As we go forward through this Shabbat and beyond, let us be mindful of our speech and the difference between speaking and saying. Think about it. Think about the difference. Let us be mindful of how we communicate and how others communicate with us as well. Let us strike a balance and find that harmony between our discourse and our interactions, both day and night. May it be God's will. Shabbat Shalom.